Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on a really foundational topic. We're going to peel back the curtain on pharmacology, the absolute bedrock of drug therapy.
Right. And our mission today is to, give you a shortcut to understand the whole rigorous process of how a chemical becomes a drug that's defined, approved, and regulated here in the U.S.
And this is such essential knowledge for you, the learner. We're talking about pharmacotherapeutics.
Or clinical pharmacology. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the branch of science that's all about using chemicals or drugs for treatment, for prevention, and for diagnosis.
So pharmacology is the big picture, the study of what chemicals do in the body. But pharmacotherapeutics is where the rubber meets the road. It's that high-stakes interaction.
It really is. It's the drug's effects on the body, and just as important, the body's sometimes very complicated response to the drug.
And that complicated response is why we have to make a huge distinction, right?
A critical one, between the therapeutic effects, what you want to happen, and the adverse effects.
The side effects.
Exactly. The undesirable, sometimes dangerous outcomes. And making that distinction, that's the job of the nurse.
Absolutely. The nurse is the final quality control checkpoint in this entire chain.
Hmm.
Your role is just monumental.
I mean, you're the one administering the drug.
You're assessing its effects, you're intervening to make it more tolerable, you're teaching the patient.
And, maybe most importantly, you are monitoring that whole plan to prevent medication errors.
And because there are literally thousands of drugs, you can't memorize them all. It's impossible.
Nobody can. That's why we focus on these core principles, the structure, the process, the law, and then rely on up-to-date guides like the LNDG for the day-to-day specifics.
Okay, so let's trace this all the way back. Before any regulation, you need the chemical itself. Where does this raw material even come from?
Well, it all started with nature. For millennia, the main source has been plants.
Like digitalis for heart conditions?
Or various opiates for sedation. Yeah, these are ancient remedies that we've just refined over time.
What's so fascinating is how we can take those natural compounds and, make them better or safer.
Right. We can create synthetic versions that are purer or that get rid of some of the unwanted side effects.
A perfect example of that is dronabinol or marinol,
Which is the synthetic version of the active ingredient in marijuana.
used for nausea in cancer patients, but without all the adverse effects you'd get from just smoking the plant.
And, sometimes the drug effect comes from something you wouldn't even think of as a drug,
Like what?
like natural licorice. If you eat a ton of it, the body converts a chemical in it into a false aldosterone.
Which is like giving yourself a massive dose of a hormone that causes fluid retention and...
And hypokalemia, dangerously low potassium, from candy.
Wow. Okay, so from plants, we move to animal products.
Yeah, used historically to replace human chemicals that were failing. The classic case is insulin.
Which originally came from the pancreas of cows and pigs.
But now, technology lets us bypass the animal completely. Through genetic engineering, we can alter the DNA of bacteria, usually E. coli.
And you basically turn them into these tiny factories.
Tiny factories that produce perfectly pure human insulin or thyroid drugs or growth hormone. It's amazing.
And the last natural source.
Inorganic compounds. Just salts of chemical elements. Think aluminum, iron, gold, fluoride, often discovered by accident to have some therapeutic effect.
Which brings us to the modern era, the purely synthetic sources.
Right. These are drugs created or tweaked in a lab to be more potent, more stable, or less toxic than the original natural prototype.
And that blueprint, that original model, is called the prototype drug.
Exactly. It's the first in class, the one that serves as the model for a whole group of similar drugs.
Like the first iPhone, and then all the later versions are just evolutions of that initial design.
Perfect analogy. And once that blueprint is drawn, the chemical has to enter the hardest test on Earth.
The FDA's multi-stage gauntlet of approval.
And it is a gauntlet.
The numbers are just staggering. Out of 100,000 potential chemicals, maybe 5 actually make it to market.
And it takes 5 to 6 years and can cost, upwards of $5 billion.
It's a huge price tag.
Mm-hmm.
That's the premium we pay to prevent the next disaster.
Precisely. The first stage is preclinical trials. This is all done on laboratory animals, not humans.
The goal here is twofold. Right?
Mm-hmm. First, confirm it has a therapeutic effect in a living system. And second, critically evaluate all the adverse effects.
And a chemical gets dropped right here if it's too toxic or doesn't do anything.
Or if it's highly teratogenic.
Meaning it causes adverse effects on a fetus.
Yes. If it passes all that, it can move to phase 1 studies.
And this is the first time it's tested in humans.
A small number of selected human volunteers. And they're usually healthy people.
Why healthy people?
Because you're just looking at how the body absorbs it, metabolizes it, and excretes it. You want to see the initial human side effects without the complication of an existing disease.
And here's an interesting safety point. Women of childbearing potential are sometimes excluded from phase 1.
That's right, because the unknown chemicals could potentially damage a woman's ova, which, are a fixed supply, unlike sperm, which are continuously produced.
So if it passes phase 1, it moves to phase 2.
Phase 2 studies. Now it's tested on actual patients, people who have the disease the drug is supposed to treat.
And they have to provide informed consent.
Absolutely. And they are monitored incredibly closely. This is where you really measure efficacy.
And this is where a lot of drugs fail.
A huge number. They get dropped here if they're less effective than you hoped, or if they have a low benefit to risk ratio.
Meaning the benefit just doesn't outweigh the dangers.
But sometimes, a negative effect can be turned into a positive.
You're talking about minoxidil.
Exactly. It was in phase 2 for hypertension, but it caused major hair growth.
So they repurposed it.
Well, it was still approved for blood pressure, but that unexpected side effect was eventually repackaged and marketed as Rogaine.
The final step before approval is phase 3 studies.
The big one.
This is wide-scale testing. You have prescribers monitoring patients out in a vast, uncontrolled environment.
They often ask patients to keep journals, to track symptoms, to spot those unforeseen responses that only show up when thousands of people start taking the drug.
And if phase 3 is successful, the FDA grants approval,
And the drug gets its 3 official names. You've got the chemical name,
which reflects its structure.
then the generic name, which is its original designation. That's the one you see in straight print.
And finally, the brand name, the trade name.
Like Rogaine, yeah. Capitalized and italicized, chosen by the company that developed it.
Now, approval isn't the end of the story.
Not at all. It transitions immediately into phase 4 studies, continuous surveillance.
So even after it's on the market.
Healthcare professionals are legally obligated to report any unexpected adverse effects they see once the drug is out there being widely used.
And this post-market phase is where the real world really tests the drug. Sometimes you find good things.
Right, like the anti-Parkinsonism drug amantadine. It was discovered to be a pretty effective antiviral against influenza, a total surprise.
But sometimes the effect is disastrous.
It can be. We only learned about the severe cardiovascular risk of rofecoxib, that's Vioxx, after it was widely marketed.
In phase 4.
In phase 4. It forced its removal in 2004. The pre-marketing studies just didn't catch that risk.
And that history of disaster is exactly why our drug laws exist. Every major law is basically a monument to a tragedy.
It is. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938. That came from the elixir of sulfanilamide disaster. It gave the FDA power to enforce toxicity and labeling standards.
And the Kefauver-Harris Act of 1962.
Came right after the global thalidomide tragedy, which caused those terrible birth defects. That act gave the FDA control over testing and set standards for efficacy and safety.
And for day-to-day practice, we have the Controlled Substances Act of 1970.
Enforced by the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. This created the categories for drugs based on their abuse potential.
This is so crucial for nurses. These DEA schedules, CI through CV.
CI is the highest abuse potential. No accepted medical use heroin, LSD. But CI, that's the danger zone for nursing practice.
High abuse potential, severe dependence.
Narcotics, amphetamines. They require safe storage, strict prescription rules. If you mess up CTI documentation, that brings massive scrutiny.
And way down at the other end, you have CV.
Limited abuse potential. Small amounts of narcotics for, say, a cough or diarrhea. Sometimes you can even get those without a prescription if you're over 18 with an ID.
Speaking of regulation, there was a major change with pregnancy safety.
Oh, yeah. The old FDA categories A, B, C, D, and X, they started phasing those out in 2015.
They were just too confusing, too simplistic.
Totally. So while you still need to know the old categories for a bit, the new approach is much clearer.
It's evidence-based, right?
It gives specific risk levels for fertility, pregnancy, and lactation right in Section 8 of the prescribing information. It's a move from an abstract letter to concrete data.
Let's shift gears for a second and talk about the economics. Once a patent runs out, we get generic drugs.
They're cheaper, sold by their ingredient name.
The benefit is huge cost savings. But there's a critical nuance here.
There is. And it's bioavailability.
Which is basically how fast and how much of the active drug actually gets into your bloodstream.
Exactly. And if the generic company uses a different binder or filler in the tablet, that process might be a little too slow or even a little too fast.
And for drugs with a very narrow margin of safety, like the heart drug digoxin or the anticoagulant warfarin,
Mm.
that small difference can be a huge deal.
A life or death deal. That's why a prescriber might write dispense as written or D.W to make sure you get the consistent quality of the brand name.
Okay, another special category, orphan drugs.
These are drugs that were discovered but just weren't financially profitable to develop. Maybe they treat a really rare disease or have a very narrow market.
So the Orphan Drug Act of 1983 stepped in.
It did. It offered financial incentives and tax breaks to drug companies willing to adopt and develop these crucial treatments for smaller populations.
Finally, we have to talk about over-the-counter, or OTC, drugs.
Available without a prescription, generally considered safe when you use them exactly as directed.
But nurses have to be so vigilant about these. There are three huge pitfalls.
1, they can mask the signs and symptoms of a serious underlying disease.
2, they can have dangerous interactions with prescription meds.
And 3, there's a very real risk of serious overdoses if people don't follow the directions perfectly.
This is why it is such a fundamental nursing responsibility.
You always have to ask patients about their OTC drug use when you take a drug history.
Because people don't think of Tylenol or an herbal supplement as a real medication.
And that assumption can lead to a catastrophe.
So with all this information constantly changing, where can we go to get up-to-the-minute, accurate information?
Start with the basics. The drug labels and the package inserts. The inserts have all the technical data from the clinical trials. The FDA is even adding a highlight section to make them easier to read.
For a quick reference, you have books. The LNDG is great for nursing implications.
The PDR, or physician's desk reference, is just a huge compilation of those package inserts, so it can be tough to use.
I've heard drug facts and comparisons is better because it organizes drugs by class.
It is. It makes it much easier to compare them. And of course, never forget reliable online sources.
And you have to educate your patients about this too.
Absolutely. Stick to reputable government and professional sites, FDA.gov, CDC.gov, or the Mayo Clinic.
So this deep dive has really shown that pharmacology is this high-stakes, super-regulated field. It's built on science, but also on responding to disaster. We followed a chemical all the way from a plant through that intense FDA gauntlet, from animal testing to healthy humans to patients and finally to the wide market.
And we clarified why knowing the difference between a generic and a brand name can be so critical.
It can be a matter of life and death.
And remember that constant surveillance, that's phase 4. Given that even the most rigorous pre-marketing studies can miss serious risks, what specific steps must you take every single day to prioritize continuous patient monitoring, assessment, and reporting to safeguard public health?
That is a powerful question to carry into your practice.
Right.
Thank you for joining us for this essential deep dive into the world of drugs.